Hello, my name is Spencer, and in my podcast called The Dictionary, I literally read from the dictionary, but add in my personal comments and stupid jokes to make it more interesting. Episodes are family-friendly, short, and air every single day on basically every podcast platform. Come join me on this journey filled with edutainment.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you've never seen, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is Daniel Kaka. And now we're back for part 2 of Dune. If you haven't listened to part 1, go ahead and pause the episode now and listen to that, or none of this will make any sense. No need to delay this any further. Let's start the episode. So, what led to the downfall of Dune? The short answer seems to be the downfall of most every film that we cover, which is money.
Yep.
Just in pre-production, up until this point, $2 million had already been spent. And the way that Jodorowsky was acting and would say anything to get anyone to sign on the film, he was getting more and more out of control. The movie, if it was made, was claimed to be the most expensive production in film history at the time. The budget ballooned to about $9.5 million, and some estimates were closer to $20 million. And the special effects had to be innovative and groundbreaking in order for them to be achieved. The actual cost of the film is unknown. Like, so many numbers were being thrown out there, which is why I'm kind of including them all, because it's so hard to know what it would actually been. According to producer Michael Sadu, the budget could have been $15 million. To put into perspective, the most expensive film at the time was Cleopatra in 1963, which cost $30 to $40 million to make. In 1974, the year before, the most expensive film was The Towering Inferno, which cost $14 million. And the 1975 Stanley Kubrick's Brandon Linden cost $12 million. So $15 million for a sci-fi epic was a big ask, but it doesn't seem like an astronomically unattainable goal. In fact, the year after, the remake of King Kong ended up costing upwards of $24 million. So from David Hughes' book, The Greatest Sci-Fi Movies Never Made, Jodorowsky claims that there was enough money to make the movie, but it was the distribution that's where the financing was lacking. He stated saying, "We had enough money from France to produce it, but the US wouldn't give us enough distribution to break even. We needed to have been in at least 1,000 theaters. The large companies refused to show the film." Now, that was confirmed by Michael Sadu in a deleted scene in the documentary. If any studio were to pick up the film, it would have cost them $5 million to do so, to distribute the film. So no one was willing to take on the film with a $5 million price tag.
Yeah.
The plan was to shoot the film in 70 millimeter on location in Algiers, Algeria. When Dune was pitched to multiple studios, they were all given a massive proof of concept book. Something about the size of a phone book with every detail to make this movie. The excessively long script, the 3,000 frame storyboard, concept art, costume art, story and character breakdowns, and much more. It was overwhelming, to say the least. The estimate for how long the actual runtime of the movie varied depending on the source. The film was originally planned to be 3 hours. When Frank Herbert visited the studio in 1976, he saw the script and would have estimated a 14-hour-long movie. He says it was the size of a phone book. And with the scenes getting cut through pre-production, it looked like the film was going to clock in at 10 hours. Jodorowsky seemed to be taking studio and producer feedback seriously when he started cutting out sex and nudity in the film, something that he has been heavily criticized for in his previous films. Things did not look good when the crew took a break during the winter holidays in 1975 and never really assembled after that. It was eventually accepted that Dune was dead in the sand. For Chris Foss, he was working on the concept art for Dune. He was also hired to do concept art for Krypton and Superman the movie. He got lucky that he wasn't left high and dry when the film was canceled. Soon after, he was asked to design Flash Gordon's rocket cycle, produced by Dino De Laurentiis. Now, you're going to have to remember that name because he's going to come up later.
Okay.
For Dan O'Bannon, during the hiatus, he went back to the US and was researching film stock. That's when he got the call that the film was canceled. Quote from Dan O'Bannon, "It was a great shock to find out that the project had been canceled, because I'd planned the next several years of my life around it and working with these wonderful people. And the movie was going to be simply remarkable, and all of a sudden it was gone. I wept. That was the first thing I did. Cry." For O'Bannon, he was broke. He had no money. All of his belongings were in Paris, and there was no way that he could afford to go there and grab his stuff. He was homeless. He went mad. He stayed in a psychiatric hospital for a little bit, then moved in with an old friend, Ronald Shusett. Together, they wrote about 13 scripts, and they landed on one story that O'Bannon was able to flesh out into a full screenplay that they first titled They Bite, and then they retitled it Starbeast. But when it was purchased by 20th Century Fox, they renamed it to Alien. In 1976, producer Dino De Laurentiis acquired the rights to Dune when he purchased them from Jean-Paul Gibbon, Michael Saydou's partner at Camera One. De Laurentiis was determined that he could make this film after producing the King Kong remake, and with the success of Star Wars right around the corner, the film seemed to be more plausible. According to H.R. Giger, the project was taken away from them by Dino De Laurentiis' daughter. When De Laurentiis took charge, he turned to Frank Herbert, who had never written a screenplay before, to write a script in 1978. Herbert managed to write a 175-page-long script that would have resulted in a 3-hour movie. To rewrite the script, De Laurentiis hired Rudy Wurlitzer, who wrote Patty Garrett and Billy and the Kid. And to direct, he got Ridley Scott, who at the time was just finishing directing a little-known film called Alien. Alien seemed to be pulling much talent from Dune and putting it into this movie. Most famously, the art of H.R. Giger in his designs of the Xenomorph. Giger was recommended by O'Bannon. Mobius provided concept art for Alien. Even Chris Foss designed a few ships that weren't used in the final version of the film. Even though H.R. Giger was bitter about Jodorowsky's Dune being canceled, he was hired on the production to create concept art for the new Dune because of how much Scott enjoyed working with him on Alien. Set construction began at Pinewood Studios while pre-production was underway. Ridley Scott was running into similar issues that Jodorowsky did while trying to keep the runtime down. But with how long the book already was and working with a 175-page long script, Scott figured it would be best to split the novel into 2 movies. He worked tirelessly on the script and ended up creating 3 new drafts with Wurlitzer. One of the drafts included an incestuous relationship between Paul and Jessica, which was cut out.
Oh, boy. I'm just like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of saw it in the new Dune movie where there were some weird looks between Jessica and Paul.
Sure, I guess that's fair.
I'm not comfortable. They didn't do anything, but there was that moment where they have to change into their moisture suits, and there's that over the shoulder look where I don't like this. I don't like where this is going. So 3 drafts were made. This was all before Ridley Scott decided to leave the production, and he wanted to work on a different sci-fi film, which was called Dangerous Days, which was later renamed to Blade Runner. For his reasoning as to why he left, the pre-production process was slow, and the actual production was becoming more and more intensive. Quote from Ridley Scott, "But after 7 months, I dropped out of Dune. But then Rudy Wurlitzer had come up with the first draft, which I felt was a descent of desolation of Frank Herbert's. But I also realized Dune was going to take a lot more work, at least 2.5 years worth. And I didn't have the time to attack that because my older brother Frank unexpectedly died of cancer while I was prepping with the De Laurentiis picture. Frankly, that freaked me out. So I went to Dino and I told him the Dune script was his. This is from the book, The Making of Movies by Paul M. Salmon. The production of Dune was shut down September 1980. Even though Jodorowsky's Dune had never been seen, the spirit of Dune still lives on in different forms. Jodorowsky and Mobius teamed up to create a graphic novel, The Incal. In the 80s, Pascal Blaise created a short animated trailer of the Incal in the hopes that it would be picked up for a movie, but it never did. After the release of The Fifth Element in 1997, Luc Besson was sued by the publishers for allegedly plagiarizing elements from the comic, but lost the case. The cause for the similar elements might have been because Moebius actually worked as a concept artist for The Fifth Element, and that's probably why.
Interesting.
In 2013, Nicholas Winding Refn was working on putting together a live-action adaptation, but dismissed the rumor in 2016. As of 2021, Taika Waititi announced that he was working on a big screen adaptation, so we're going to have to keep an eye out for that.
Okay.
Dune is in the world like a dream, but dream change the world also.
You look at Star Wars and the lightsaber, and so much of them reflect the storyboard frames from Dune. Mm-hmm. I even think of like the voice that's used in Dune, and I keep thinking, that's Jedi mind tricks.
Yeah.
Like that's essentially what it is.
There's a lot of the Book of Dune that's so clearly the desert planet, the worm and everything. But it is interesting how like visually there is a lot that's specific to Jodorowsky's Dune.
They even mention like Paul duels a robot to train, like how Luke trains with the marksman H. Mm-hmm. I kept thinking to the new Dune movie, and it wasn't until I watched the David Lynch movie, where he basically has two training scenes, the one with basically his trainer, and then there's the one with the robot. And I was like, I can see why they cut that part out of the movie, because like you only really need one training scene. Yeah. That's about it. In Dune, we see the robot's POV, where they're looking around and in real time analyzing its surrounding, like with the Terminator or RoboCop, with their view of the world. In Flash Gordon, there's Mingo City, which looks similar to the layout of the Senate. When a pair of goggles are ripped off of a henchman's face only to reveal that he's a robot and that was his eyes, that's also a scene from Dune. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, when the Ark of the Covenant is opened, a beam of fire blasts into the sky. The shot sequence resembles a scene where Paul attacks the Harkonnen by beaming a light into the sky and sends a deadly smoke into the enemy army, just like when the ghosts from the Covenant leave and weave through the Nazis and eventually kill them. In Masters of the Universe, He-Man's outfit bears an odd resemblance to Duke Leto's outfits, and Skeletor's golden headdress is very similar to the Salvador Dali's Emperor's Crown. Reminder that Moebius also worked on the concept art for Masters of the Universe, so that's maybe the reason why there. The Galaxy one-shot, which I mentioned multiple times before, was actually the opening shot in the movie Contact. So that's the first time we actually saw like a camera traveling through space.
If I'm not mistaken, Contact was pulling out, right?
Yes, it was going the opposite way. Yeah. And then in Prometheus, the temple with the skull on top is almost an exact copy of the H.R. Giger Harkonnen's castle.
Which makes perfect sense for them to want to use that.
Oh, yeah.
I will say a lot of what you're talking about is used at the end of that documentary as well. And there are some of the things that I'm not 100% convinced were like, oh, this only happened because it was in Jodorowsky's Dune. Stuff like the galaxy pullout, I feel like that could be something that somebody else came up with completely independently. But like, there's definitely a lot that I 100% believe in. Like the Prometheus thing just seems obvious, especially since H.R. Giger is such a big part of the design of the original Alien. Of course, they're going to return to H.R. Giger's earlier paintings for a prequel to Alien.
When Prometheus came out, was H.R. Giger, was he still alive?
Yes.
Okay. Did they hire him on, or were they...
I'm not sure.
My assumption was that they were just looking through H.R. Giger art, and they were like, well, what haven't we used from him?
Yeah, before? It looks like he did work on the film, like coming up with ideas and designs as well.
Okay.
So it could just be a case of H.R. Giger reusing one of his own designs. But I could also see it as a thing where Ridley Scott was like, oh, we need to go back to this thing that you drew way back when and bring that back.
Yeah, where he's like, it's such a brilliant idea. I don't know why no one's ever used it before.
Yeah.
The other obvious one, I think it was from Flash Gordon, was like the robot with binocular eyes, or the goggles were ripped off. It was almost like a frame-for-frame remake from the storyboard from what I saw. But there is some things where I'm like, it kind of seems like a stretch. So like when Paul puts up the beam of fire up into the sky and how that's supposed to resemble the Ark of the Covenant being open, I think that's more coincidental.
Yeah.
What I do think is interesting is that for Dune to be influential in the movies that airs today, obviously there's like the H.R. Giger thing. It's kind of like Thomas Edison, who is credited for inventing a lot of stuff, but it wasn't Thomas Edison himself who was doing all this. He was basically just the one who was putting the name on the patents. Like at the invention of the light bulb, he actually did like a hive mind of many other inventors, brought them into one area, and was like, cool, we're all going to try and solve this problem together.
Yeah.
And then once that idea was made, then he put his name on the patent as if he was the one who invented it, when in actuality, he was an investor. And I feel like Jodorowsky, he is an artist himself, but he was able to bring in a lot of these artists who never really had much to do with film in general. And he's like, no, this is how you can use your art for film. And with him not being able to make this film, all these other people then realize, oh, well, if I can get a job this way, I can get a job in other films as well.
Yeah.
And then their art is then expanded into the zeitgeist of the art within film, which has been so much more influential. Like it's just, the web just keeps on spreading out further and further from this.
Absolutely. And this really does seem to be so evident of how even things that are not made continue to affect, if they're interesting enough, if they're good enough, it affects what does get made in the future.
Yeah.
This is something that also sticks out to me about the legend of this movie, where the cult of personality that Jodorowsky had to bring all these people together and inspire them to make movies definitely also did not pan out in his own movie, and these ambitions were unfeasible. But that story and that legend and that cult of personality certainly has spread to the way other people have seen the project of Jodorowsky's Dune. And to some degrees, the mythic reputation that it has may not cause some people to do some insane things.
Yeah, it definitely did. We will get into that eventually, because it is a very interesting story. And I know that it was something that I knew I had to include in this, because it is part of the story. Alejandro Jodorowsky moved on from Dune, knowing that he put in his best effort, and went on to make a film called Tusk in 1980, a film about a girl who has a spiritual connection with an elephant and not a podcaster who gets biologically rearranged into a walrus. The production of Tusk was so difficult that the film was never released, even though it was finished. Scattered VHS copies of the film have been found, but the original print has not been released. Jodorowsky was not proud of the movie and was quoted saying, "Don't see Tusk. I bury that film." In 1981, Dino De Laurentiis was determined to produce Dune, and even doubled down on his investment. He paid Frank Herbert $2 million, not only for the rights to Dune, but the sequels as well. He figured that this franchise could rival Star Wars, which had just released Empire, and the third film was on its way. Dino set everything up to create a successful film franchise, but unfortunately he was getting at an age where he wasn't up to the task. At this time, he was about 62, and he passed on the task to his daughter, Rafaela. And I think this is why H.R. Giger actually said that his daughter, Rafaela De Laurentiis, took the movie, who at the time was producing Conan the Barbarian. For Rafaela, this was her dream project. She was a fan of Herbert, and in a letter that she wrote to her father when she was really young, she said, "No matter what happens, you're not allowed to start Dune without me." Her first task was to find a director that could take on such a vast challenge. And having recently watched the heartbreaking film The Elephant Man, she knew the director she needed was David Lynch, who was nearly unavailable when he was offered to direct Return of the Jedi, but he refused that job. That's a whole different universe if we got a David Lynch Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, that's one of those big Star Wars what-ifs.
For Lynch, he took the job. And with that, he did a page one rewrite with the help of Eric Bergen and Christopher DeVore, which were his co-writers for The Elephant Man. Lynch eventually rewrote about 7 drafts on his own. But after a year of pre-production, in 1983, Dune was finally ready to film. Unlike Jodorowsky, David Lynch would consult with Frank Herbert frequently while writing the script and had him on set during the production. The budget for Dune was estimated to be around $40 to $42 million. In comparison, Return of the Jedi was anywhere between $32 to $42 million. So somewhat similar, but not so similar in the box office performance. Jedi brought in over $475 million, while Dune was a fraction of that amount with just under $31 million. This journey to make Dune seemed to have been completed when it was released in December of 1984. Jodorowsky was urged by his friends to see the film in theaters. He had mixed feelings about the film going in because this was a film that he was so determined to make, and he thought highly of David Lynch and believed he could take the baton and finish where he left off. After seeing the movie, Jodorowsky exclaimed that it's a failure. The film, if you have already determined, was a flop. Any plans to make the sequels were already scrapped. This led to the downfall of De Laurentiis' production company DEG, or De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, which would eventually collapse in 1989. De Laurentiis, he continued to produce films even after the end of his production company. And looking at his filmography, his influence is both part of film history and ripples throughout Hollywood today. He gave small directors their big breaks, like with David Lynch, but also David Cronenberg with Dead Zone, Sam Raimi with Army of Darkness, Michael Mann with Manhunter, and the Wachowskis with Bound.
Wow.
Even Stephen King and the cocaine-fueled Maximum Overdrive.
Wow.
Yeah. Over the span of his career, he is responsible for over 600 titles. And Rafaela, his daughter, is still continuing in her father's footsteps and is still making movies to this day. I didn't know where to fit this in because I was watching the David Lynch movie yesterday and I was starting to take notes and whatnot. And one of the things that stood out to me was Toto scored the movie. What?
Yeah.
What?
Do you know who the lead singer of Toto was at the time?
I feel like I know, but you're going to have to tell me.
Well, I'll say this. He also composed the song Lopty Neck in the original Return of the Jedi, as well as the Ewok Celebration song.
Oh, no, I don't know this.
His name is Joseph Williams, son of John Williams.
Oh. You're right. You've told me this before. That explains a lot.
Yep.
For David Lynch, he saw Dune as a low part in his career. It's hard to blame the failure of the 1984 Dune on his shoulders alone. Lynch's original film had a runtime of about 3 hours, but their distributor, Universal Studios, was pressuring the production to cut it down to about 2 and cause many scenes to be refilmed. Parts of the story were condensed or discarded. This becomes apparent right at the beginning of the film when we get that lengthy monologue from Princess Arulin laying out the exposition of the story.
The Spacing Guild and its navigators, who the spice has mutated over 4,000 years, use the orange spice gas, which gives them the ability to fold space.
There's also a weird part in that monologue where she's like, oh yeah, and I forgot.
Oh yes, I forgot to tell you. The spice exists on only one planet in the entire universe.
It's like, what? We're still here. It's like when you put a PS in a letter before you sign out. That's not how that works.
Yeah.
Postscripts go after the signature. And you can definitely feel the producer's notes. I'm speculating here. I don't know if this is true. I don't even think David Lynch was there to direct that monologue in the beginning. My suspicion is that he did not want to do this or have any part of it. It was because of the experience that he vowed that he would work exclusively on his own material and no longer be a director for hire. It's such an interesting perspective to think of, if David Lynch had never done this movie, we probably wouldn't have the filmography that we got from him today. We probably wouldn't have Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
For him to say, I'm no longer doing anyone else's material. I'm only doing my own. And it was because of this movie. Had this movie actually been a success, his career would have gone off in a completely different direction.
Yeah, yeah.
After this, his next film was Blue Velvet, which was also executively produced by Dino De Laurentiis. My guess is that Dino kind of felt sorry for him and was like, okay, we'll actually let you do what you do best, and I'll fund it. I'll make sure you're being taken care of. The film did introduce Lynch to a few actors which he would use in the future, including Everett McGill, Dean Stockwell, and of course, Kyle
MacLachlan.
When the extended edition was released, something that was not approved by Lynch, he asked that his name be removed from the credits. Instead, they used the name Alan Smithy, which is a Directors Guild standard placeholder.
Yep.
Universal did ask Lynch to edit the cut, but he declined the offer. My guess is that he just didn't want anything to do with this movie anymore. You want me to improve this now? Now? I wanted to improve the movie when I was making the movie, and you were the ones in charge of making it shitty. Now you want to make it better? No. This is your fault. This is your fault that this happened. Yeah. For Frank Herbert, he passed away on February 11th, 1986, while recovering from surgery for pancreatic cancer. The year before is when Herbert published the final installment in the Dune literature, Chapter House Dune. This seemed to be the end of the Dune era. Eventually, the literature would be continued by his son Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson in 1999, which they concluded in 2016. They based stories on notes and drafts written by Frank and wrote 14 prequels, sequels, and expanded universe novels. There's a lot to Dune.
Yeah.
The rights for Dune went into an odd state of limbo. De Laurentiis reverted the rights back to Herbert after the disappointing outcome of the film, and when Herbert passed away, the film rights to the property went to Universal, but had no interest in making another film. Martin Elper became interested in continuing the legacy of Dune, but not as a movie or a TV show, but as a video game. Elper was a game designer who founded Mastertronic, which was then purchased by Virgin Interactive Entertainment in 1987, in which Elper became the president of that division of Virgin. Martin was a fan of Dune and was able to license the property in 1999 and began developing a game. Like any other production of Dune, it was complicated. After reading and rereading this stupidly complicated history of the development of the game, here's a simple overview of it. The game went to a development team in London. The game was worked on for about 6 months under the design of producer Dave Bishop. When the team pitched the game after 6 months to Virgin Games USA, they did not like the direction of the game and wanted to cancel that project. As a saving grace, Frank Herman kept funding the group, and Philip Ulrich, another head of the division, relabeled the branch as Cryo Entertainment and continued on with this project, even though the US said that they didn't like it and they wanted it canceled. Meanwhile, in the US, they announced that the project was canceled, but no contracts were drawn up to finalize this decision. So they pretty much worked in secret. Now, for Martin Elper, he's the one who got the rights, he saw the cancellation as a done deal. And after meeting with Westwood Studios in Las Vegas in 1999, he agreed to hand over the adaptation rights to them to make a Dune video games. So now we have 2 Dune games in development under the same company, Virgin. Cryo managed to release their game just before Westwood Studios, which forced them to title their game Dune 2. Although it shares the same name, Dune, and has the confusing 2 in the title, the 2 games are completely different, even though they're both distributed by Virgin.
Huh.
Yeah.
Weird.
Dune PC game came out in 1992, was way ahead of its time as a strategy game. As you play as Paul Atreides, as you navigate the planet of Arrakis, in the beginning you can explore the palace of the Atreides and interact with characters. What made this unique is that these characters could actually join your crew, and depending on the character, they would reveal different areas around the world, they would introduce you to the Fremen, and then you could train those Fremens to fight for you. The game takes place in a 3D world, and has a unique first-person flight system in which you can fly a thopter through the dunes of the planet and even experience the passage of time on the planet. So if you wait long enough, you can actually see the sun set and rise on Arrakis.
Wow.
The round planet in which you never reach the end of the map because the map is round. So there is no end of the world. You could just keep going around this planet, which is really neat. This is all established before you begin the actual strategy part of the game, in which you need to position the Fremen in areas to protect the Atreides from the Harkonnens, all while trying to mine the spice melange. There's also consequences to certain actions, like if you choose to improve the planet's overall ecological health, this is great for the inhabitants, but it also destroys your production to produce more spice. Or you can just take over the planet entirely and just say, all the spice is for me, and then the Harkonnens keep coming after you. This was the game that Virgin did not like. They did not want this game. And then there's the Westwood Studios Dune 2, released the same year, 1992. This was a real-time strategy game in which you choose one of three armies, the Harkonnen, the Atreides, or the Fremen. You build an empire against competing armies, and depending on who wins determines the outcome of the planet. It was later redone in 1999. It's very much like Dota. I don't know if you've ever played that before.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like Age of Empires. It's basically kind of like that, but for Dune.
It's a real-time strategy game.
When it was redone in 1999, it was known as Dune 2000. Cryo also tried to revamp their Dune game around the same time, called Frank Herbert's Dune, which was a third-person strategy game. The game was poorly reviewed, and soon after that company went under. Sorry, Cryo then turned into a private company after they diverged from Virgin. But then Cryo went under, not Virgin.
But there was also, in the 80s or 90s, there was a very popular board game called Dune Imperium that became a lost game that was very, very expensive to find. And but recently got remade. And so now you can go buy Dune Imperium again. It's 1979 is when the Dune board game came out. It's also kind of famous for being asymmetrical game where every faction plays differently. And
interesting.
Yeah. So it's like you can be the Fremen, the House Atreides, the Harkonnen, but they all have wildly different goals, wildly different ways of playing.
Yeah, that does make sense because even in the book, all of them have different goals.
That game actually has a lot of influence on a lot of board gaming. My favorite board game, Root, is a asymmetrical war game, and it takes a lot of inspiration from the original Dune board game.
If we could, that would be a great game night thing.
Try to play the Dune board game?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be down for that. Hey, if you have a TTS, we can try playing it on TTS and stream it.
All right. So let's go back to the 90s. Enter Richard Rubinstein. He is a television producer who, while working on the sports docuseries in the mid-70s called The Winners, was inspired to go into film after hiring an up-and-coming filmmaker. You may know him as George Romero. Together, they created a production company, Laurel Entertainment, which is responsible for Romero's films Martin, Dawn of the Dead, Night Riders, Creepshow, and Day of the Dead. Rubinstein decided he wanted to go back into television, while Romero continued with movies. So they split on good terms, and Rubinstein would go on to make the series Tales of the Dark Side, Monsters, and Stephen King's Golden Years. Stephen King proved to be a moneymaker for studios on the big screen, but after the success of It and The Stand, both television miniseries, this proved that profits could be made on the small screen as well. This allowed more time for filmmakers to work with complicated narratives and long-form storytelling. And what book has complicated narratives and long-form storytelling? Well, Dune, of course. Rubinstein managed to acquire the rights to the entire Dune series in 1996. According to Dune remake, the classic novel, De Laurentiis still owned the theatrical rights, so Rubinstein, quote, went ahead and bought the television rights from the Herbert estates. Now, I was unaware that there are different adaptation rights to IPs. I thought it was you get an adaptation right and you get to borrow it for a little while until it expires. But I didn't realize that there are different rights for television versus movies versus video games. I was unaware that they are completely separate in acquiring those rights.
Yeah.
So this is the first time that I've actually really been aware of that. Rubinstein found difficulties initially pitching Dune to different networks, consistently being rejected for the next 3 years. The special effects technology just wasn't there yet, and Dune was still dealing with the reputation of the 1984 movie. But one network was looking to put themselves on the map and take the challenge. And that network was the SciFi Network.
You are watching the Sci-Fi Channel.
In 1999, Frank Herbert's Dune was now in production. The series was led by writer and director John Harrison, who previously worked for Laurel Entertainment in various jobs such as an extra in Dawn of the Dead, an assistant in Knight Rider, a first AD in Creepshow, a composer on Day of the Dead, and his move into being a writer and director is when he worked for the shows Tales of the Darkness and Monsters. Harrison was a fan of Dune and Herbert's novels, and Rubinstein seeked him out to lead the series. Harrison had the advantage of taking the adaptation decades later because not only could he draw from the original novel, but also included lore established in the sequel books. The budget of the series was about $20 million, which doesn't seem too bad considering the past attempts. The runtime for this was about 4.5 hours. The miniseries was nominated for 3 Primetime Emmy Awards in 2001 for Outstanding Sound Editing for a miniseries, movie, or special, which they lost. But they did win Outstanding Cinematography for a miniseries or movie, and also won Outstanding Visual Effects for a miniseries, movie, or special. Something that the series was criticized about was the fact that Harrison would take what would be an internal thought stated in the book and have the characters say them out loud, and was adamantly against using voiceover, which made the characters feel more shallow.
I will face my fear. I will let it pass through me. When the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain.
In the Lynch version, he seems to take advantage of the voiceover for some of the characters' inner thoughts.
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. I must not
Fear flesh.
This is always a challenge that I see with book-to-screen adaptations. Writers can easily slip between thoughts in the voice of the characters with ease, but performed in live action, this is always a tricky balance.
Yeah.
But as a testament to this series, most of the fans have said that the series is probably the most faithful to the books that are out there. Regardless, the ratings were high enough to justify the sequel series, Frank Herbert's Children of Dune, which covers the plot of the second and third book, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. It also had a young James McAvoy in it.
Remember the words of my father and my grandfather, your duke. They spoke to you of desert power. I am desert power.
The series was, again, written by John Harrison, but he was unavailable to direct. The series ended there. From Harrison, quote, "My personal feeling is these next 2 books are really one piece. They basically conclude the Atreides saga, justifying why he stopped the series there." Dune continues to be this white whale in Hollywood, and rumors of Paramount Pictures obtaining the rights and having plans to make the major motion picture started circulating in October 2007. In March 2008, it was confirmed that Paramount was making a Dune film with producer Kevin Misher and Richard Rubinstein, who still had the screen rights. To direct was Peter Berg. He directed Friday Night Lights, The Kingdom, and Hancock. Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson were hired as advisors. To play Paul, there was an up-and-coming actor that they had in mind, Robert Pattinson. Yeah. Josh Zudemer was hired to write the script. This writer we've actually talked about before in our RoboCop episode when he was hired to write the RoboCop sequel, but that never got made, along with a few other unmade films that he wrote, which was the 4th Jason Bourne film and the original Infiltrator and Villain, which was listed on the blacklist and even had Leonardo DiCaprio attached to it. After 2 years in pre-production and the budget ballooning from $100 million to $175 million, making the studio nervous about giving the project the green light. Peter Berg got impatient and he left to make his next movie, Battleship. Paramount searched for a new director that could keep the budget low. And at first, they sought out Neil Blomkamp. He's seeming to be one of our unmade all-stars here. But he then declined. And then Neil Marshall, who directed The Descent, he also declined. And then they finally landed on Pierre Morel, who directed Taken. In 2010, he wanted a page one rewrite. Morel was a knowledgeable fan of the Dune books and wanted a script that was faithful to the text. To write the adaptation was Chase Palmer, an up-and-coming writer at the time, but would go on to co-write It. In November 2010, Morel left the project for creative differences. There was suspicion that it was because of Paramount's push to make the film 3D like Avatar, but that has not been confirmed. Paramount was in a panic mode, because if they did not start the production by 2011, their rights to the screen adaptation would expire. And with no green light to be seen at the end of this tunnel, this is exactly what Paramount let happen. Rubinstein would admit that it all came down to the film costing too much to make, which seems to be the end of most of these stories. In May 2011, director Frank Pavich started gathering interviews from key players in the production of the unmade Alejandro Jodorowsky Dune film, compiled them together to make the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune. It was because of this project, Jodorowsky and producer Michael Sadu reunited after having not worked with each other since Dune and made a film which is, well, I can't read this, but it's translated to The Dance of Reality. It was the documentary that got people interested in Jodorowsky's crazy vision to make Dune. Some would even go to say that it was the best movie never made.
Yeah.
Some fans will go even further, like Twitter user at the Spice DAO, or the Spice DAO is what I'm going to call them. On January 15th, 2022, they tweeted out, quote, "We won the auction for 2.66 million euros. Now our mission is to 1. Make the book public to the extent permitted by law. 2. Produce an original animated limited series inspired by the book and sell it to streaming services. 3. Support derivative projects from the community." This sounds crazy at first, and I was going down this rabbit hole of what I should research, and then I eventually found it was a lawyer who actually explained this whole thing. He broke down every bit of it. Lawful Masses with Leonard French. So that's who I was going off of. And he did a really good job breaking this down. This tweet went out. It got a lot of attention for its boldness and possible stupidity. The tweet was bombarded by Law Twitter with all the same message. They bought a collectible book for way too much money. And if you have a copy of a book, that does not permit you to the intellectual rights to distribute it in any way.
Yeah.
So to back up, the book, which is Jodorowsky's proof of concept book for Dune. There was only maybe 2 in existence.
Yeah.
It was up for auction on the website Christie's. The book was estimated to sell for about 25 to 35,000 euros. Sold for an absurd amount, 2.66 million euros out of nowhere. The person who went through with the purchase goes under the Twitter handle at Soby Life. In his profile, he claims to be the co-founder of Expopolis and the Butterfly DAO. He seems to be dabbling in cryptocurrency and NFT investments. He claims that he spent the majority of his fortune on the book. According to the podcast in which he was on, the Filmumentaries, which featured Frank Pavich, Soby, and Dan Lanigan, Soby was able to explain his hopeful thoughts when he acquired the book. He said that he wanted to make the book digitally public and hoped that a community of fans would help create a fan fiction-like animated series. A wishful willing this into existence with no expectations to make money from it. Even if that were to happen, he would have to acquire the rights from Jodorowsky, the Herbert estate, and the current studios distributing the pictures, which is Universal and Warner Brothers. As of December 2021, Spice DAO put out a statement saying that they are working with legal advisors on what they can do to get this out there. At the moment, their plan is to send someone to Paris to retrieve the book in person from Christie's. Spice DAO was going to reimburse Soby for the purchase. Spice actually is a cryptocurrency that was started by Soby. So if anyone invests into Spice, they become a member as part of the Spice DAO organization, can actually vote on what the outcome of this book is and this property is. After the book is in possession of the Spice DAO, they would keep the book in a professional art storage location and would be commissioned to be digitized. As far as any updates, it seems like they're still raising money for legal rights and fees while also digitizing the books in a non-destructive high-resolution way and working on an animated series. They're still running into a lot of issues because they don't have the rights to the books or the art inside of it. From @ChrisFossArt, he tweeted out, "You don't have permission to advertise your online business using Dune Guild Tug artwork by Chris Foss. Please remove this artwork from your various business platforms." From Spice DAO, they have come out with a statement that reads, quote, "While we do not own the IP to Frank Herbert's masterpiece, we are uniquely positioned with the opportunity to create our own addition to the genre as an homage to the giants who came before us." And in the podcast, Soby said,
"Art should not be held hostage, bro." Right? And we're taking that and we're like actually sharing it with the world. And
so it seems like they're not really trying to profit off of it.
They are, in the sense of, to have a vote in this, you have to buy into the cryptocurrency. This whole thing definitely was, for me, it's just like, kind of spoke to a lot of the delusions of grandeur that happens with a lot of NFT crypto communities. I can see like what somebody's saying, like not wanting to profit off it, but the very nature of the way that NFTs work is all profit and trying to monetize things that shouldn't be monetized by buying into this whole system and everything. And that's a conversation probably for another time.
Yeah. I mean, the means of getting it may be profitable, but like...
Yeah. It seems like there's more people than not who genuinely just want this thing to be out there.
Yeah. And then lastly, how did we get the Dune film that we have today? So in 2016, Legendary Pictures sought out the rights to make the picture. According to the credits, Robert Rubinstein still obtains the rights and was actually credited as a producer on the film. So I don't know how he kept those, but yeah, sure. The rights to the IP are also in possession of Frank Herbert's children and grandchildren under the company Herbert Productions, LLC. In November 2016, a deal was finalized and Legendary had the rights to produce Dune. Now they had to find the right director. Denis Villeneuve, who directed Prisoners, Sicario, Arrival, he had just finished Blade Runner 2049. For Villeneuve, this was a massive undertaking. He spent 2 years in pre-production, and work on the script didn't start until a year into pre-production. Mm-hmm. He knew that with how much was in the book, the film would have to be split into 2 parts. So when he made a deal with Warner Brothers, it had to be for a 2-picture deal, the same deal that was made when it was being optioned. To write the script, they hired Eric Roth, who did Forrest Gump, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and John Spaths, who wrote Doctor Strange, Passengers, and Prometheus.
Dr. Strangelove.
No, Doctor Strange.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Where's my brain at? Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My brain is off.
Filming began in early 2019 and took about 5 months to finish. Everything seemed to be on track and run smoothly, ready for the theatrical release in November 2020. But because something weird happened in the world, that got delayed to December 2020, and then it got delayed again to October 2021. Mm-hmm. As frustrating as the delays were, this was a blessing in disguise, which allowed Villeneuve more time in post-production, in which he thought he would have to rush with the original release date. And as of now, Dune Part 2 is currently in production with an expected release date of October 20th, 2023.
Very excited for Dune Part 2.
Yeah. And I rewatched Dune recently, and now knowing the story of Dune, I realize now that what Denis Villeneuve has done with Dune, it's brilliant. It looks so good. It's immensely faithful to the text. It's just so well done. Unfortunately, it's coming out in an era where like special effects are kind of expected in everything that we watch.
Yeah.
And we have a shorter attention span from watching something like superhero movies, where it kind of feels like Dune is cursed by a slower pacing. But as far as the adaptation is and how it looks, and like, you can definitely tell Villeneuve has put so much care and effort into this movie to look as good as it is. It looks like he's been given so much freedom to make sure that the story is done right.
Yeah. Wow, this was quite a journey. What an epic.
Yeah. I'm so glad I went through this. This was one of the hardest things that I had to research, but I'm so glad I did it. I'm so glad I went through this. Dune's
a lot.
I think this podcast is nearly as long as the movie itself.
Yep. Well, I don't have anything else to say about this. You got anything else to comment on, Dan?
Go watch Dune, and hopefully by the time this is done, hopefully it'll be before the release of the second Dune movie.
For sure. Well, thank you everybody so much for listening. If you want to find more episodes of this podcast, you can go check out our website, pipedreampodcasts.com, which is where you can also find Come On Fahoogwapods, The Mystery Shack, Look Back, and Escape from Vault Disney. While you're there, you can find links to all of our social media pages. We are on Twitter at HDTNGM, and we are on Instagram at How Did This Not Get Made. And you can send us your emails with suggestions, corrections, or just musings about Dune. You can send those emails to notgetmade@gmail.com. We also have a Patreon page. We're so thankful for the donations we get on Patreon. You can get access to the Button Club, to special monthly bonus episodes where oftentimes talk about movies that were made.
Yes.
A lot of that kind of talk happening there. So if you like the movie talk and you want to hear our hot takes on whatever the latest release is, subscribing to our Patreon's a great place to hear that.
It is, yes.
That's going to wrap us up. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening.
Bye-bye.
The spice must flow.
Spice. Amazing.
They never said that in the Denis Villeneuve movie. I was disappointed.
Maybe they're waiting for the second movie.
Yeah.
That's the Avengers Assemble, where they're
Yeah,
going to tease you with it, and then they'll eventually get it. I lost the little rubber piece to my earbud.
Oh, no. Not the little rubber piece.
It just completely disappeared.
Weird.
I just found the rubber piece. It was in my hair. There we go.
This is why you got to do what I'm doing and not have any hair.
Oh, that's true.